everybody. Hello. So this evening we're going to be using our time together to reflect on the summit so far, what it's meant for us personally and collectively, and how do we start to connect up the threads to create a bigger picture of how we can work together effectively moving forwards, and how we can work with other progressive actors and movements of change across the country. So we're going to be starting with some what has been termed speed mating, slightly unfortunately, or networking, but we thought speed mating was a better term than networking, in pairs to give you a chance to share some personal reflections with and meet other summit participants. After that, our guest Andrew Sims will share reflections on essential ingredients for rapid transition, and then we'll be going into breakout rooms to discuss the common themes and threads emerging from the summit so far, and then we will come back together to look at the bigger picture that is emerging with the help of our mapper Roxy, visual note taker Fanny, and keynote listeners Indra Adnan and Brian Channa. And so to our guests who are going to be joining us and offering their thoughts and reflections this evening. Andrew Sims is an author, political economist and campaigner. He's co-director of the New Weather Institute, coordinator of the Rapid Transition Alliance, assistant director of Scientists for Global Responsibility, and was policy director at the New Economics Foundation for many years. He devised Earth Overshoot Day, marking when in the year we start living beyond our ecological means, and coined the term clone towns, describing the homogenization of high streets caused by chain stores. New Scientist magazine called him a master at joined up progressive thinking, which is exactly what he is here to help us do this evening. Indra Adnan is coordinator of the Alternative UK, a political platform which publishes the Daily Alternative, which is wonderful and essential reading. I highly recommend it. She convenes new systems actors and builds Cosmo-local citizen action networks. She's a psychotherapist, journalist, and author of The Politics of Waking Up, out in May. And Brian Channa is CEO of the Black Policy Institute, a UK think tank, Oxford University alumni and ex-parliamentary staffer. He spent 20 years collaborating with both public and private organizations, developing and implementing programs on well-being, challenging discrimination, creative thinking, leadership, networking, and job-seeking skills. He's a community organizer and ex-BAME chair, Labour, Lewisham East. So welcome all three of you. Wonderful to have you. Thank you for joining us on a Friday evening. In this next section, we're going to begin to think collectively and to reflect on the common themes that have been emerging during the summit. And I can't think of a better person to help us to frame this reflection than Andrew Sims. Andrew is going to frame our reflection in the context of rapid transition and some lessons that can be learned from the coronavirus that we have been living through. Andrew, over to you.
And the problem is, I feel so completely mellow after that last burst of music and paddling that I've completely forgotten what I was going to say, and I'm very, very, very chilled. I'll tell you what, Zoom has really moved on since the early days of lockdown, when I can remember doing some events with Richard Couldry and getting South Londoners together virtually. We used to think it was a bit of a triumph then if you could just unmute yourself, and now you've got speed mating and Padlets with fabulous music. So it's all very good. This evening's called What Next? And I'm going to talk very quickly. I apologize for that in advance because I've got slightly less time than originally planned. So apologies. But what next? Well, the honest answer to that, I think, is that we don't know. And that could be a really good thing, because based upon some recent evidence, I think we could surprise ourselves. What do we need? I think possibly the biggest thing we need is belief in the possibility of change, the ability to turn around at every point where somebody tells us that the thing which needs to happen can't be done, and to say, yes, it can, and here's why, and that's where it's already happening, and that's where it's being done already. Now, I feel like I'm kind of really living the moment at the just now, because for various reasons. I had COVID a couple of months ago myself. I've now been vaccinated. I live in a house where somebody works in the NHS, and I live around the corner from Clapham Common, where it was all kicking off last weekend. So I feel like I'm kind of like really living the moment. But what I disagree with is the words of Boris Johnson from the end of January, when he was challenged in Parliament over the fact of the UK having one of the worst death rates from COVID. And he said, in response to a question from Keir Starmer, he said about examining the lessons of the moment. He said, I don't think now's the moment to do that. And you kind of think, well, when is? Because I think we can learn from the pandemic lessons for the rapid transition to a well-being economy, which is greener, fairer, not just in the UK, but that can stand as a beacon more widely, that speaks in the face of the climate emergency and the crisis of inequality. And I think what's dramatically changed is a few years ago, one of the most common little motifs doing the rounds on the World Wide Web was about how it was easier to imagine the end of the world than a fundamental change to our economic system. But now, however apocalyptic things might feel, I don't think that's any longer true, because if there's one lesson we take from the last 12 months or so, that far from change being difficult or impossible, we can turn not just the economy, but our day-to-day lives around almost overnight, and that we can choose to put public health and well-being before short-term economic interest. And I think the other thing in the UK context which has changed is that we've got a huge grassroots democratic mandate to do that as well. You know, over 90% of the population of the UK now live somewhere where a climate emergency has already been declared, and the question is, how do we turn that declaration into practical plans on the ground and on the at the local level? And I think some of the things which have happened during the pandemic show us exactly how we can do that. But first of all, and I think importantly, we've seen how the pandemic has revealed many of those underlying flaws and imbalances in the way that we live. We've seen the bias in urban space towards cars and the issues around low traffic neighborhoods. We've seen the undervaluing of key workers, the split between the health system and the care system, the inequality of impact from the pandemic, with low waged and more marginalized communities being far worse hit. We've seen the difference between the protections for waged workers and freelancers, big businesses and small businesses, homeowners and renters. And we've also seen how the decline of local retail banking, which used to underpin the local economy, the effect that that's had, that there's not been the capacity or the skills base to kind of help local businesses. And we've also seen at a kind of very big picture level, the way that the more laissez-faire economies of the US and the UK have had some of the highest mortality rates. But we've also seen, in a really fundamental way, the speed with which we can see potential for rapid behavior change and rapid economic re-engineering towards a more convivial economy. Lockdown itself showed us how quickly we could adapt behaviors, new social norms of wearing face masks to protect each other, etc., and indeed accepting just being at home for those who've got the opportunity to do that. We've shown a willingness to turn our lives upside down, to put each other's well-being first. And now, so in spite of all these difficulties, we've demonstrated the possibility of some of these being potentially enduring changes. But I think there's been a fascinating array of really specific things that have happened as well. So rapid industrial conversion, we're often very locally focused in transition, but sort of industrial conversion at a large scale is important too. We've seen how textile factories have turned around to produce personal protective equipment, and we've seen how at the local level networks, I know there's at least one person here from Somerset tonight because I was speaking to them during the speed mating. In Somerset, there was a network of over 700 people who came together at a local level to produce PPE. We've seen brewers and perfume makers turning to making hand gel and sanitizer. We've seen how car makers, indeed Formula One engineers, turning around and helping to design new breathing aids that have helped hospitals. We've seen in Switzerland how the airline is retraining pilots in association with the Swiss railways to produce more train drivers, etc., etc. So we've seen some extraordinary things. We've seen some new language entering as well. The phrase talking about unnecessary travel. I was very amused actually when Michael Gove was on BBC Radio a short while ago, squirming to justify why Boris Johnson had gone to sort of proselytise in Scotland. You know, what was the justification for his trip? And there's a new social norm where we're cutting out a lot of unnecessary travel, which means saving money, saving time, and saving carbon. I think that's kind of quite interesting, especially where the air pollution linked to a lot of transport also worsens mortality rates from respiratory diseases, COVID-related, etc. The aviation industry is being forced with having to come up with conversion plans plans because of the radical change in that kind of behavior. And we've seen people representing what used to be fairly hardline motoring lobbies turning around and saying, yeah, the new norm is going to be a lot less commuting, a lot fewer cars on the road in the long term when we've got back to being comfortable with using public transport again. So time liberation, shifting online, and precedents for traffic reduction. We've seen the flexibility around patterns for work. Now, this is very unequal and uneven because some people have been put in a very bad position where they've had to go out and sort of be more exposed during the pandemic. But at the same time, we've revealed how we don't need massive new skyscrapers being built in the big cities, and there's a lot more flexibility that when you bring together some more flexible approaches to working, shorter working week, and underpinning it with the revived debate around basic income, the possibility for much more convivial and sustainable lifestyles. We've been able to reconnect with our communities and our neighborhoods, and even more opportunities for active citizenship. The networks of mutual aid support groups at the local level that set up so quickly were incredibly impressive. My local community owned, managed and run football team in Wimbledon has been outside the big food shops collecting for food banks on a daily basis through all weathers. Really, really impressive stuff. We need to be careful that employers don't pass costs on to staff and reduce their sort of protections, but there is shifts there. On
1 minute left, Andrew.
1 minute, speed through. So really interesting changes in consumer behavior as well. I was really amused to see the big shops talking, running campaigns for buying only what you need during the pandemic. Well, maybe that's something we should do anyway, more generally. Reskilling. God knows how many loaves of sourdough bread have been baked during the last period of time. Extraordinary things. We've celebrated key workers in a way which has never happened before. We need to translate that through into proper material support. No magic money tree, rubbish. It's called quantitative easing. We've already discovered that in the aftermath of the financial crisis, and now an additional 150 billion QE announced last November in response to the pandemic. We can find the resources for things that we need to know. Nature bounce back, really interesting, reconnecting with nature. I read the other day my favorite story of the last few months about finding beavers in the River Otter. Love that. Just to kind of wrap up, I suppose, there's loads of other examples. If you go to rapidtransition.org, you can see examples of really rapid change happening, practical examples all around the world in all kinds of different circumstances. But I think the biggest thing is just remembering that we do have this incredible agency to change ourselves, to change our behavior, to re-engineer our economies. And I think it all starts from the community up. I'll finish with a short little quote from Rebecca Solnit, who said recently, writing about the current context, "I believe in the generosity and solidarity in action in the present moment, and that it offers a foreshadowing of what is possible and necessary. The basic generosity and empathy of most ordinary people should be regarded as a treasure, a light and an energy source that can drive a better society if it is recognized and encouraged." And I'll finish there, and I'll copy a note through to some documents and briefings and short little videos on the Rapid Transition site, where you can get a lot more detail on this kind of stuff that we've been following through, looking at lessons from lockdown. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing some really interesting points there about rapid transition in a very speedy delivery. Thank you. And I think that's a really useful framing, and it's given us some food for thought as we head into another exercise to connect the dots and understand what the common themes and working models and challenges that have been arising during this summit over the last 3 weeks. So what we're going to do now is split you into breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people. And in those rooms, we would like you to reflect on 4 questions. These are all going to come into the chat, so you don't need to remember them now. So one is, what are the common themes that you have seen emerging through the summit? So this might be something like in relation to community action in the UK. So it could be, that social justice and diversity are important, or that building sustainable livelihoods is a crucial part of the transition, or so those are some examples of what are the common themes that you've seen coming through in terms of where our movement is right now. And the second question is, what models and approaches do you think are working? So that might be, for example, working with your local council or using the donor economics model. What are these models and approaches that are being really helpful as we're trying to create this change? And thirdly, what are the key challenges and obstacles that we're meeting as a movement? And then what support could be helpful to overcome these challenges and barriers?
So here is a big picture of the past weeks. Wow, it has been a beautiful long way, and from what is to what if. So here on the title, you can see the blizzard of stories we started with. Then we went from climate emergency to topic of food, social justice, then during the what if week, we played with scale from individual to community, society, and then we begin to imagine future also by creating together a town 2030, a town anywhere. Wow, so big thank you to all these input conversations. It has been a beautiful ride. Thank you.
And yeah, Roxy's been working really hard over these 3 weeks to plot and map all the different projects onto this. So really excited to see where it's got to. I think you're host now, so you should be able to share.
Oh, great, thank you. So can everyone see this map here? Yeah? Do you see it, Rhiannon?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone. I've had really great fun adding in these incredible community projects, enterprises, networks and movements from the participants of this What Next Summit. It's been a privilege to essentially have a tour of activities that are building community power and regenerative communities across the UK. So let's just zoom in a bit here and see what we've got. There are a lot more to add in, which will be added in over the coming days. It doesn't seem to zoom in very well while I'm sharing my screen, so I apologise for that. Hey, here we go. So, yeah. So, as you can see, unsurprisingly, we have a lot of transition projects, which you can see here in green. So, yeah, loads of amazing transition projects are here. We've got Transition at Abergavenny, New Mills, got some all the way up in Scotland. There's a Green and Melrose. And in red, you can see that we've got lots of different networks. So we've got mutual aid networks, like Time Bank, Hull and East Riding. You may have seen. They're really worth checking out if you haven't come across them. Some exceptional work being done there. We've got social enterprise networks like Torbay Local Spark down here where I am in Devon. And we've got some awesome, we've got Flat Pack Democracy, which are a network of independent candidates taking on their councils, bring it back to the people. And what else have we got? We've got Trust the People, which is Trust People networks, building community power across the UK through community assemblies. And we've got, what else have we got?
That's looking great. Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, hang on. We've also got in blue, we've got loads of projects from community energy, sustainable fashion, whole town asset-based community development projects, food hubs and markets. So just loads. And finally, I will show you how to add to the map because we would love to have some more added on here. So if you click the plus sign in the top of this screen, like you just saw me do, and then type in your place. So I'll give you an example of in Exeter. We've got transition Exeter. So right up here at the top, you'll see in bold, it will have a place, and you can change that name to your project name, your enterprise or network. And then you can copy and paste like a paragraph or something from the website, or just write about your project. And then if you click up here, you can type in or copy and paste in the web address, which I don't know what it is, but you can get the point.
Great, thanks, Roxy. I think we're going to have to move on to our seeing our Padlets now, but thank you so much for all that work on the map. And as Roxy said, please do add your projects on there. It's super easy to do. We're loving Padlet and how easy it is making all this collective mapping work. So please do go in and add your projects there, and we'll pop a link in the chat now. All right, Rob, I think we're going over to you and Dan to look at our common themes that have been emerging, and we're going to hear a bit from you and then our keynote listeners who have been listening intently.
Indeed. So in terms of what are the common themes that are emerging for people, I think it's very hard to do it justice because there are so many great things, but just to pull out a few, I think the fact that system change and social justice are really needed come through very strongly throughout the whole summit. The importance of the imagination, and the imagination needs space. Inclusion and diversity has come through in many comments as being a really key part of what's happening here. More support for social enterprise networks, and this idea of a movement of movements. In terms of what models and approaches are working, universal basic income has come up many times throughout this summit. Working across difference and having the tools, digital and local, to enable us to do that. The ability to ask really good questions, and we've seen that with what if questions, the Three Horizons framework. Also, I think with the session about Barrow last Tuesday, which was extraordinary. Actioning at the local level, replicating, collaborating, and taking things to scale, and resources. And donut economics was also something that came through very strongly. Do I keep going, or is Dan going to do a couple?
Okay. Keep going, Rob.
I'll keep going. Okay. So in terms of what are the key challenges and obstacles, money, funding, the fact that so many of these projects rely on volunteers, the feeling of powerlessness that so many of us feel in the face of the current appalling political system, the dominance of the growth narrative, the lack of interest in the mainstream media for any of this stuff, and lack of time. Our immediate life challenges often take over. And lastly, what support could be helpful to overcome these challenges and barriers? Having one platform for sharing, smooth tech that's good, flat pack democracy, support for climate emergency centers. That's just a little taste of some of the richness that's been coming through here. So, excuse me, just 1 second.
Thanks, Rob. And so I think we're going to hear from some of our keynote listeners now. Yes, indeed. So we're going to now turn to Indra and to Brian. So you two, you've both been listening with great focus and attentiveness over the last hour or so, and we'd love to now invite your keynote listenership. Having listened to everything so far, what's interesting about what the participants have identified as emerging from community-led movements in the UK and during this summit? Indra, let's start with you.
So there's really so much to respond to, and I think that what's useful, or what I can offer to this space, is really to connect it a little bit to what might be going on from inside of this movement that we have, to what might be going on outside of this movement as well, and to see whether that addresses any of our obstacles that we've been identifying. So what I've been experiencing over this past couple of weeks, and also I have to say what I've been experiencing over the last 15 years or so, working with transition, being part of this, being part of Control Shift, is a very different quality of conversation. It's a way of people being together in relationship, having ideas, making those ideas come into fruition, but always connecting everything in a certain way. So it's always these spaces of huge connection. And the connection is not simply to each other in a sort of horizontal way, but there seems to be the language and the story of connection of the health of human beings to the health of their communities, burgeoning communities, with an interest on the impact on the planet. So this has been a growing conversation. And I think over the last couple of weeks, I've heard not only more of this and the depth of it, but the projects that have been developed over, recently, in an accelerated way, I think, over COVID. The possibility of what we could be imagining is getting clearer and clearer. However, in this space as well, there is a lot of frustration, I sense. There is a sense of, how can we really make a difference? How do we impact upon the wider world that we're always experiencing and witnessing? So our newspapers are full of, what isn't working, what is dysfunctional. And also the language of our politics doesn't really give us a way into where our agency lies. So if anybody's wondering why am I doing this reflective listening? Well, it's partly because we've been working outside of the normal power system for some time and developing our own media system for reporting all of this that's been going on. So when we decided to be an alternative political system, we decided to stop listening to the mainstream news and start reporting what was going on in the 98%. And we're not only looking in the UK, but we're looking all over the world. And what I see occurring all the time is this combination of relationships, language, storytelling, which are creating sort of fractals, if you like, of new possibility, are not only appearing here in the UK, they're appearing all over the globe in a very familiar way. So you hear conversations going on in community networks in Africa, in India, in Portugal, all over Scandinavia. These are appearing like fractals. And I use that word very pointedly because when you think of change happening in those terms, you can begin to imagine how these things could all connect up with each other. But you can't feel that unless there is a media in a way that's connecting these stories. So while there is frustration, I feel, around whether or not we're making a difference, what more difference could we make? If we start to look at what we're doing in a different way, perhaps to stop thinking about the current idea of where power lies, and start to think about developing our own different kind of power, then immediately we start to think about the future quite differently. Now, another clue is that other people who are thinking about it in this way are the people who are working in the world of technology. So in technology, almost all the same sort of values that we're describing are being explored and developed. The rapid connecting of ideas, the ways of really picking up on our emotional expressions and connecting them. They're talking also, many of you will know, about a future pretty close by in which everything will become one mass big connectedness called the singularity. But it's being described in technical terms. Now, when you hear about it in technical terms, it can be really quite frightening and overwhelming, the sense of that we're going to be taken over by the technology. But if we remember that we ourselves are wired and technical entities, and that we are creating our own singularity all the time. In fact, for anyone here who's a bit spiritual will know that, there is always a sense of us being interconnected and interdependent. But actually that language is now coming into the mainstream, and we're going to be very much part of that. So the thing to watch out for, I feel, is the quality, is not to be overwhelmed, not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by lack of time or space or money. In a sense, that's the old system. You know, really what we're valuing is the conversations we're having, the way we feel when we're in conversation with each other, and notice that this is exactly what is being created all around us as well. You know, for those of us who've been in Zoom rooms, who've been in WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, but, you know, even more recently, those of us who've been part of Clubhouse, you know, or other really live spaces where people are literally just coming into conversations with each other. This is going to be dominating the system more and more in the future. But for us as communities, that sense of our ownership of this is very, very important. That each one of us needs to feel that we're owning this space ourselves. Communities need to feel their continued ownership of it, and not to be hijacked by the thing that's coming at us from a great distance. So this sense of, am I making sense of it for myself? Can I be in a really good quality conversation and tell a good story? This ultimately is what's going to lead, believe it or not, to the new economy that's already coming into being. So think less, I think, about how do we influence the old system, and what is this new system that we are right now giving rise to, and what is the economy of this? Let's keep owning this. I think that's the feeling that I've got. What we've got is great, but we must keep owning it ourselves.
Thank you, Indra. Thank you so much. And Brian.
Yeah, it'd be very, very easy for me to say exactly what Indra said. I'm tempted to say that. Thank you very much, Indra. And I just want to thank you as well for inviting me here to kind of talk today as well. Yeah, so many thoughts have actually gone through my head, and it's very kind of difficult to kind of just tell you this in a very kind of short space, but I'll do my best. Where I would sort of start is just some key musings that I've sort of taken from these conversations. So first of all, I'd like to kind of point my finger at the word COVID. I think what COVID has done is sort of exposed the fault lines of inequality and injustice. And in a way, it's actually had an opportunity to hold up a mirror to ourselves and ask us the questions, do we like what we see? I think many of us have actually said, no, we don't like what we see. And I think, again, when we realize that we don't like what we see, we have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And I think we've really exchanged the words good and bad for better and worse. And by doing that, we sort of lost our moral compass. So it's actually begged the question of helping us or asking us to contextualize where we are and where we've been in order for us not to really repeat the same mistakes of the past. And I think I really enjoyed our talks because it's really summoning new systems of thinking and being to kind of project ourselves into a better sense of the future. So when there's like one thing that kind of stuck with me is like a word that's going to live in my brain rent free is the word donut. I really love that donut concept, and the space to kind of think of those people that are hugely invisible when we're thinking. I really love that. I think it's a beautiful model of inclusivity. It reminds me a bit like a book that I read. It was a guy called Luke Reinhardt, and he wrote he wrote this. I can't remember that way. There's another guy called Ralph Ellison. He wrote The Invisible Man, but it also reminds me of a book that Luke Reinhardt actually created, and he created a simple concept that really transformed the whole world. And I think you're right. It's when we dare to change, that will give us the power to do the bidding that we need to see. There's a beautiful quote. It says that sometimes we inherit the government that we deserve, and I'm thinking, and how I feel right now, is that we've all come together to say that we actually deserve a lot better. And there's a sense, I think there's a sense that we want something different, and we don't want to do things so we can arrive back at the same place again. And I say that there's a quote that I've written before, and it says, "I dream within my mother's dreams, because within her possibility of me, I am endless." And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have these courageous thoughts, courageous conversations, in order to try to talk about the things that we've been needing to talk about for a long time, and challenge the systems and aspects and people in the systems that we've been needing to challenge. What else do I have here? I think what we have seen as well is that the ability to see that we are capable of rapid change through seeing how different countries, and this country, has actually responded to the COVID. Thank you, Andrew Sims. I think you've given us a really beautiful illustration of all the kind of issues that COVID has actually brought with it, and how we as a country have actually come together to kind of, to show us the best of what we can be. I think there's a groundswell of small organizations that have come together and start trying to reimagine this world and society in a better sense. I also feel like, we've actually dipped into technology like, Zoom and IT, and I think we've seen that technology itself can actually connect us a lot clearer together as well. And it can help us find systems of thinking and templates of thinking to actually challenge the various obstacles in our way. Yeah, I think I'll sort of leave it there for now. But yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to kind of speak with you today.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for your thoughts. And we have less time than we had anticipated we might have at this point in the evening, because we've had so much fun with Padlets and with our speed mating, something to tell the grandchildren about. And so if anybody has any question for our panelists, you might pop them in the chat, or I might think of one, unless we get one. Well, I might ask one and we'll see how we get on. I wonder, for each of you, one of the things we've been really exploring in this summit has been how best to collaborate across different movements and networks. We have people here during the summit from a wide range of different networks and movements. I wonder what advice you might have as we start thinking beyond this summit, and as we start thinking into working together more to have more impact and more effectiveness. What might be your tips? What suggestions might you have for everybody here? Just a couple of minutes each, maybe, so we might get time for another one. Andrew, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, actually, because it's one of my favorite themes. If you look back over the history of how civil society has organized around issues over the last few years, I think one of the downsides has been the way in which different groups, and sometimes it's the larger organizations, can be quite territorial and not so good at coming together. And I think one of the big lessons we have at the moment is that if we're going to win the progress that we want to see, we've got to be very open and large-hearted in our collaborations. And I think the way in which we can amplify and share each other's work, and to do it actively and generously so that we create a bigger conversation, I think that will massively increase the influence that we have and our agency. So I'd like to see much more of that, sharing each other's work, amplifying it where it's good, shining a light on the good things that are happening. And I think if we do that as a movement, we'll see things move forward much more quickly than they have done so far.
Muted, God, yeah. And Indra, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've got two specific thoughts. One is that to lose the idea of bringing people into our tent. I think this is a moment where we're so rich and we've got so much to share and we're so ahead of the game in so many ways that we should be moving into other people's spaces and trying to sort of bring what we have into other people's spaces. And the other thing is to move from being, in a way, civil society, which is, the usual suspects. We are that, right? We are the usual suspects. So, we should be actively trying to create spaces where people who are not like us, who are not in the conversation, might meet us, right? So maybe place-based networks are very important now. And I actually had a radical idea offered to me recently that in each city or town, we could just create a club or we call them a can, some sort of a container that anybody and everybody could join without any prior requisite in a way, and just become meeting spaces, nothing else. And that everything would be built on making new relationships. This would so rapidly change the nature of the conversation, and we'd all stop trying to own it. Anything we join, I feel from now on, must be co-owned. If any one of us is trying to be the umbrella over all the others, I think we can only keep people out by doing that. Everything that we do now should be co-owned, I feel. You're muted, Rob.
God.
I just
Brian is what I meant to say.
I heard the B.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think also we have to look at our strengths. I think we can do a skills assessment and we can start sharing that skills and strengthen each other's pods wherever we're at. We can share knowledge. So yeah, there's a lot more we can do when it comes to connectivity. And I do agree with you. We have to kind of co-own spaces, and we have to go into other spaces and challenge people's thinkings and perception and give them something different. Sometimes people think the way they think because they don't have an alternative way of actually thinking that's going to be a lot more conducive for society. And we have to kind of document and actually articulate that alternative way and why it's better. And I think there's some really easy wins that we can go for. And again, we can be that society of change. There's many people here that they're all very gifted. They've all got lots of great ideas. We have to create a bank of ideas, a bank of resources to go with those ideas. We can create like a digital library that people can actually dip into. We can create framework library where people can dip into. I'm looking at framework for courageous conversations. I'm looking at a framework to actually have conflict resolution. I'm looking at frameworks to actually convince people who are very hard at convincing. We're looking for frameworks, or we're looking for a group of people to do fundraising. So again, as soon as we kind of work out how we're going to do our connectivity, we can create a database of people, a database of resources, and then that will in turn empower us and make us a lot more effective. Thank you.
There's a question from Roxy who said, how can we support the next generation in this work, our young people who are, some of them emerging into these movements through the youth climate movements, through Black Lives Matter? How, as people active in networks and movements, can we offer the best support possible to our young people? Maybe let's reverse the order, Brian.
Okay. I think each one of us have the onus to kind of be a mentor to somebody younger than us. I also believe there should be a young people steering group so we can actually hear young people's perspective on things. We have to, just like we're saying that we're fighting for spaces, we're trying to get into spaces, we have to give the younger generation spaces. I think they need to be not only, someone was speaking earlier on today about like a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. And we can still do that with young people. We can meet them and listen and learn from young people, as well as try to educate them as well. So it's like, again, systems of learning and practice, behaviors and thinking. And we have to be able to present that to young people so they don't have to, again, make the same mistakes that we've made. They can actually move forward with the wisdom that we've actually learned through our own experiences.
Fantastic. Thank you. Indra?
So in a really practical way, I've found that the best thing I can do with the young people around me is to find ways to pay them. Literally, how to pay young people so that they can have, so they can choose the kind of work they want to do and help them to develop that. I mean, we're part of a Kickstarter program at the moment, which everybody should try to be part of, really, that will allow young people on basic income, on universal benefits, sorry, to work for you. You know, that's a great thing to do. You know, let the government pay you to help them choose the jobs they want to do in, you know, as we move into the future. So that's my way of encouraging them, and then staying in relationship to them as they try to face the future, and they try to think about where their passion lies and what kind of future they want to go for, and then fund them to do it. You know, when they're young, they will, you know, that any amount of money is better than nothing, and they'll be very supported in doing that.
And lastly, Andrew.
Not a huge amount to add to that, other than to agree, absolutely mentoring. I think it's also very important sometimes when the big public debates are going on, and trying to make sure that the resources and the capacity building, the skills training, etc., is available. I think it's really important for us to kind of step back and let young people have the airtime and have the space. And the other thing that I found that I've done, not in a kind of a deliberate or designed way, but if I myself step back and look at a range of the different projects I'm working on at the moment, almost every single thing that we're doing in partnership with people who are, let's just say, significantly younger than you and I, Rob. And I find that fantastically creative and enriching to do that, because automatically you're introducing multiple perspectives, which then flow through into the perspective and the quality of your output. So I think work with young people, mentor, yes, step back to give them airspace on when it's right and good to do so. That would be my sort of 3-point plan of action.
Thanks. And Rob, I'm going to jump in with the final question, if that's all right, before we move to closing, because I feel we haven't touched on it, isn't it? It's kind of important in this bigger picture of change. And I'd like to ask the speakers, in what way, if any, do you think our movement should engage with mainstream political parties? And I know that's a big question. We don't have very long to go into detail.
In 1 minute each.
In 1 minute each, yeah. Like what are your, you know, a lot of us, I hold that question in me at this time, at this moment right now. Yeah, that's the question. Should we start with Andrew? You're nodding your head, so maybe you'll have
Sure.
an
Yeah, well, it's the classic paradox that we've discussed many times in transition settings, in that, you know, we believe in local action, but local action is either enabled or disabled by parameters and frameworks that are set by national politicians. One of the answers we have to that is to do things like the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, the Green New Deal, policy packages and deals. We try to build popular support for them to make those policies more likely. But the other thing to remember, I think, is that the people who comprise major political parties are people, and they're people who are responsive to argument, idea, example, like everybody else. So I think we model, we communicate, we engage in argument which seeks to speak to the moment. And the thing I was going to say earlier that I left out of my presentation is that the degree to which we are successful will be the degree to which we can interpret and put our solutions and ideas forward as answers to the day-to-day problems and challenges and obstacles that people are facing. If we don't get our work and the transition movement more broadly to speak to how it is the answer to the problems people are facing, we will not succeed. If we do that, then I think it brings a major mainstream political argument with it that automatically speaks to those parties.
Great, thank you. And Indra, come to you, and then Brian.
Yeah, I mean, in a minute, the only choice you're giving me really is to be very radical and very straight. You know, I feel it's very important to separate ourselves culturally from the current politics. I feel that our politics is really built as a structure on division, and that we've really learned how to look at each other as enemies, or as people who are either for or against what we believe in. So I think the necessity of really removing ourselves from that mentally is absolutely the first thing we have to do if we're going to build a movement that connects people and connects planet, right? However, I'm not making politics irrelevant. what I'm trying to land is this possibility of a parallel system where there's a socio-politics that is being developed through movements like ours that then wants to have a partnership with the old system. So I'm really advocating partnership between a new socially orientated, human orientated system that understands that the old politics belongs to the past, but is still very functional. So that parallel system, which would basically require us to have a people's parliament ultimately, right at the national level, is the one that I would be advocating.
Great, thank you, Indra. And I know I'm putting you on the spot with very quick answers here. And Brian, if you'd like to share your views.
I really love what Indra is saying. I think, again, this is where we can actually build a groundswell. I think sometimes we have to speak the language of politicians, and politicians will go where the vote is. And if we can create a group of people, and then we can tell the politicians what our interests are, they will be more inclined to listen to us as well. And I think also there's lots of policy meetings. So if you go onto like the local political websites, you see there's lots of policy meetings. We have to be in the rooms to influence policymakers, influence the discussions that they're actually having, and actually start putting our value systems into the bloodstream of the political conversation.
Thank you all so much, and we're going to just pop to Fanny now to see what Fanny has captured from our discussions this evening. Fanny.
So I will share my screen and I will show you a bit of what I've been doing during this amazing games and conversations. Thank you.
Wow, Fanny, you're amazing. Thank you so much. You've brought such colour and beauty to this summit. Thank you so much.